The 7 levels of strength in One Piece. In One Piece, strength is not a single linear concept. It does not move in a straight line, where one character simply overpowers another. Instead, it unfolds in layers, each one redefining what power truly means as the scale of the world expands. At the beginning of the journey, overwhelming force might be enough to dominate an island, or crush a small crew. However, as the story progresses, that same level of dominance begins to look insignificant when placed next to individuals capable of reshaping entire battlefields, influencing global events, or standing at the center of history itself. This is precisely what makes power scaling in One Piece so compelling. The difference between being formidable and being truly untouchable is not just large, it is transformative. A figure like Arlong once embodied terror in East Blue. Later, someone like Katakuri would demonstrate what it means to control a battlefield with precision and composure. And above them, entities like Kaido exist in a category that feels almost detached from conventional limits. With that in mind, this breakdown explores the 7 distinct levels of strength in One Piece, tracing the evolution from localized threats to individuals whose presence alone can alter the course of the world. Some placements may be open to interpretation, but that ambiguity is part of the design. The objective here is not to argue over exact rankings, but to understand the structure that separates one tier from another. Level 1, the Dangerous Fighter. At the foundation of this hierarchy lies the Dangerous Fighter, a category that includes individuals who clearly surpass ordinary humans, yet remain confined within a limited scope of influence. Characters such as Arlong, Don Krieg, or Kuro illustrate this stage effectively. Each of them possessed attributes that made them dominant within their respective environments. Arlong combined physical superiority with intimidation. Krieg relied on overwhelming weaponry and scale, and Kuro demonstrated speed that outclassed most opponents he faced. Within their own narratives, they appeared almost insurmountable. However, this perception was largely shaped by context rather than absolute capability. Once the broader world begins to reveal itself, it becomes evident that their strength, while impressive in isolation, lacks the depth required to compete at higher tiers. These fighters can control territory, impose fear, and defeat weaker adversaries with consistency. Yet when confronted with the true elites of the Grand Line, their limitations become undeniable. They represent danger, but not distinction. Level 2, the Elite Specialist. Building upon that foundation, the next stage introduces the Elite Specialist, a class defined not merely by strength, but by refinement and discipline. Here, combat ceases to be raw and begins to take on a more structured form. Individuals such as Mr. One, Kaku, and pre-time skip Rob Lucci exemplify this progression. Each of them developed a specific skill set to an advanced degree, turning their bodies and techniques into highly efficient instruments of combat. Mr. One's blade-like physiology allowed him to merge offense and defense seamlessly. Kaku combined Rokushiki techniques with swordsmanship in a way that created unpredictability. Lucci, perhaps the most complete example at this stage, embodied precision, control, and relentless pressure. What distinguishes this level is not simply capability, but optimization. Every movement, every strike, and every decision is sharpened through training and experience. Even so, this refinement has its limits. As formidable as these individuals are, they remain bound to a system where technique alone cannot overcome the next great threshold. That threshold is not physical, it is spiritual. And it is at that point where the balance of power begins to shift dramatically. Level 3, the Haki-certified threat. The introduction of Haki marks a decisive turning point, giving rise to the Haki-certified threat. At this stage, combat evolves beyond physical attributes and enters a realm governed by willpower, awareness, and presence. Figures such as Virgo, Pika, and Who's Who demonstrate how this transition elevates a fighter's effectiveness. Their strength no longer depends solely on technique. It is reinforced by an invisible layer that enhances both offense and defense while sharpening perception. Observation Haki allows anticipation of incoming attacks, while Armament Haki reinforces strikes and provides protection against previously intangible abilities. As a result, encounters become far less predictable and significantly more unforgiving. Virgo, for instance, does not merely rely on brute force. His presence feels dense and unyielding. Pika transforms the battlefield itself into a strategic obstacle, while Who's Who combines agility with enough pressure to punish even minor mistakes. At this level, combatants gain a form of authority. Their actions carry weight, and their presence alone can influence the outcome of a confrontation. They are no longer simply skilled participants. They are genuine threats within the new world. Level 4, the Commander Wall. As the scale continues to expand, we reach the Commander Wall, a tier where fighters begin to resemble immovable forces rather than mere competitors. This category includes individuals such as Katakuri, King, Marco, and, in certain contexts, Zoro and Sanji at their peak portrayals within the same bracket. These figures serve as the backbone of powerful crews, capable of enduring extreme conditions while maintaining offensive pressure. What defines this level is completeness. Katakuri's mastery of observation Haki, combined with composure and adaptability, allowed him to control the flow of battle. King's durability and mobility created a near-constant advantage, while Marco's regenerative abilities made him exceptionally difficult to neutralize. These individuals are not defined by a single strength, but by a balanced combination of attributes that make them exceptionally difficult to overcome. However, this is also where one of the most important distinctions in the series becomes evident. A commander can challenge a top-tier opponent and prolong the confrontation, yet crossing that final boundary remains a rare achievement. They stand at the edge of supremacy, powerful enough to dominate most of the world, but not quite enough to define it. Level 5, the top-tier ruler. Beyond that boundary lies the realm of the top-tier ruler, where individuals no longer operate as participants in conflicts, but as defining forces within them. This level encompasses figures such as Akainu, Kizaru, Aokiji, Big Mom, Blackbeard, and, depending on interpretation, characters like Luffy, Shanks, and Mihawk at their highest expressions. At this stage, traditional comparisons begin to lose clarity. These are not merely powerful fighters. They are entities whose actions carry global consequences. Akainu represents absolute authority through relentless offense and unwavering resolve. Kizaru embodies a form of unpredictability tied to overwhelming speed. Big Mom combines durability with destructive capability, creating an almost chaotic presence. Blackbeard, in contrast, introduces instability, making him uniquely dangerous. The key difference at this level lies in impact. The question is no longer whether these individuals can defeat others in combat, but rather how their decisions reshape the world around them. They do not simply win battles, they influence eras. Level 6, the Mythic Apex. From there, the hierarchy ascends into the Mythic Apex, a domain reserved for individuals, whose power transcends conventional expectations. Names such as Kaido, Goldie, Roger, Prime Whitebeard, and Prime Garp define this category. These figures are not only remembered for their strength, but for the scale at which they operated. Kaido, for example, embodied endurance and resilience to such an extent that defeating him felt almost implausible. His capabilities extended across every dimension of combat, creating the impression of an insurmountable force. Roger's legacy, on the other hand, is intertwined with achievement. Reaching the final island elevated him beyond simple comparisons, placing him at the center of the world's greatest mystery. Whitebeard, during his prime, represented overwhelming power capable of altering the environment itself, while Garp stood as a marine counterpart who could match that level through sheer force. What unites these individuals is not only their strength, but their role as reference points. They establish the upper limits against which all others are measured. They are not participants in the system. They define its boundaries. Level 7. The Legendary World Shaper. At the highest point of this structure lies the Legendary World Shaper, a tier where strength becomes inseparable from history, symbolism, and the fundamental structure of the world. Figures such as Joy Boy and Imu occupy this space, representing forces that extend beyond visible feats and into the deeper narrative of the series. Unlike previous levels, this category cannot be evaluated solely through combat. Instead, it is defined by influence that spans generations. Joy Boy's name resonates across centuries, suggesting a legacy that continues to shape events long after its origin. Imu, hidden yet central, represents control over the very framework of the world's power dynamics. At this stage, strength evolves into something more abstract. It is no longer limited to physical dominance, but encompasses historical impact, ideological weight, and the ability to shape entire civilizations. These are not simply powerful individuals. They are the architects of eras. When examining strength in One Piece, it becomes clear that the concept cannot be reduced to simple comparisons. Each level introduces a new dimension, expanding the meaning of power as the scale of the world increases. From figures like Arlong and Kuro, who once dominated confined spaces, to specialists such as Lucci and Kaku, who refined combat into precision, the journey continues through. Haki-enhanced fighters like Virgo, into the resilience of commanders such as Katakuri and King. Beyond them stand the rulers of the current age, including Akainu, Big Mom, and Blackbeard, followed by the mythic figures of the past like Kaido, Roger, and Whitebeard. And at the very peak, beyond even those legends, exist the forces tied to the deepest layers of history itself. What emerges is not a simple ranking, but a progression. Because in One Piece, the higher one ascends, the less strength resembles a tool of combat, and the more it begins to resemble destiny,